I will first read from Cherry's chapter in the prologue, which is the very first chapter, and then I'll read from her grandmother's, her paternal grandmother who lives in Paris, France, and her maternal grandmother who lives in Little Saigon, Orange County, California. So in this scene, Cherry has just arrived in Vietnam, where her older brother, Lum, has lived for the last 5 years. Her older brother was exiled to Vietnam when he was an unruly teenager, but instead of going back to America, he decided to stay in Vietnam, which alarmed the family and really disturbed Cherry. So she goes back to Vietnam with the hopes of trying to bring him back to America. Aside from the afternoon tour of the housing project, Cherry has barely seen her brother. Lum's company is at a crucial stage in the project, days away from their grand unveiling to clients, and he can't afford to go sightseeing. He leaves her every morning at the house with Grand Aunt and Grand Uncle Tran. It's not so bad. She has a month. She likes exploring the house where her grandparents lived, sleeping in the bedroom that once belonged to her parents. Cherry's grandparents gave their house to the Trans before escaping the country. The tall, gray concrete house, with creaky floors and paper-thin walls, sits in a middle-class neighborhood surrounded by other homes just like it. The shady, winding street crackles with women, young and elderly, cooking outside their front doors, trucks and scooters rattling by, and children chasing each other in overlapping, endless games of tag. At night, Cherry listens to the thumps of the water pipes constantly adjusting to the changes in pressure. She imagines one of them bursting, flooding the house, forcing them all out. Spending so much time with the Trans, Cherry understands why Lum hasn't bothered moving out. They are his ideal parents, compulsively doting upon him, preparing his meals and pressing his clothes, without ever questioning his comings and goings, or scolding his table manners. Having lost 2 sons in the war, the youngest Cherry's father's age, Lum's presence is more than enough to fill them with excited chatter at dinner time. In the daylight, Cherry can best recognize Grand Aunt's resemblance to Grandpère, the same lion's nose and widow's peak forehead. While these features accentuated Grandpère's stern demeanor, Cherry finds them unsettling and severe on Grand Aunt's face. Granduncle appears less intimidating, a chubby, squat man with ice-white hair and a sneeze that can shake the kitchen table. He and Grand Aunt owned a tailor shop that catered to foreigners during the war. After the fall of Saigon, the communist police forced their business to close. Eventually, through persistent networking with the local government, they landed a uniform contract for the primary schools in Ho Chi Minh City, which allowed them to reopen their shop. After Grand Aunt prepares a breakfast of pan-fried noodles or vegetable soup, they walk around the neighborhoods, attempting to fulfill Cherry's request to see the city her parents once knew, before the Microsoft billboards and the ubiquitous Kodak photoshops. In the Cholon district, Grand Aunt points out the Trans' old apartment and former friends' homes. They pass the food markets where her grandmère once frequented and have lunch in Grandpère's favorite garden. They visit the cemetery where the Trans sons are buried. Cherry never feels more American than when they are walking. She guiltily buffers herself between her much frailer relatives, who never seem nervous as they weave through the steady cross-flow of cars, motorbikes, and pedestrians, pulling Cherry through the city current. They won't hit you, Granduncle tries to assure her, if you go slow enough. In America, we stop for pedestrians, Cherry says, eyeing a family of 4 sailing past on a scooter. Grand Aunt shakes her head at yet another illogical foreign habit. If we all stopped, no one would get anywhere. No matter. Grand Aunt feels most comfortable at home, cleaning the rooms and preparing meals, and when Cherry sits with her, Grand Aunt likes to tell stories. Her subject taboo is clear. Nothing about the war and its aftermath. Bad memories, she says. I'm too old to cry anymore. She prefers talking about her childhood in Nha Trang with Grandpère, her sons, and the fables she learned from Cherry's great-grandmother. Her favorite is the Truong sisters, legendary warriors from the 1st century who successfully drove out the Chinese, the first time anyway, to establish the country's independence. They are considered Vietnam's national mothers. But they were married to the same man, Cherry says. Grandaunt waves her hand dismissively. All marriages have their problems. Look at your grandparents. Perhaps they would have been happier with that kind of arrangement. You mean Grandpère would have been happier, Cherry says. Grandaunt only smiles. They had a complicated marriage. Many of us do. The Tale of Q, which Cherry tried to read in college, is another fable Grandaunt likes to repeat. Though the main heroine is a prostitute, her despised social position is a tragedy she is forced into. Every story ends with a lesson. Everyone has choices taken away from them. Despair is pushed into our lives. We can only control how we recover. Like you, Grandaunt says carefully, as they assemble salad rolls for dinner. You look so healthy and strong now. Your parents must be proud. So Lum has told her about the accident. This shouldn't surprise Cherry, although she suddenly feels self-conscious, wondering how much Grandaunt knows. Lum had me call every day while you were in the hospital, Grandaunt says, dipping another sheet of rice paper into a bowl of water to soften it. I tried to get him on the phone, but he didn't want to speak to your parents. My parents don't know the whole story, Cherry says. They still can't understand. Have you tried to make them understand, Grandaunt asks. Cherry falters briefly under the woman's firm gaze. Yes. It doesn't matter, Grandaunt says, returning to her rolls. He is fine now. I don't have to tell you, you can see for yourself. We have been good for your brother. They did ask him to come back, Cherry says. But he has a life here now. But it's not home, Cherry says, struggling to control her impatience. It's not America. Instead of becoming angry, as Cherry expects, Grandaunt only smiles faintly, bemused. After spreading the mint, basil, bean sprouts, and shrimp together, she wraps and tucks it into a perfectly shaped roll. You know who you sound like, Grandaunt says? Your grandfather, when he tried to convince Bak Jang and me to leave Vietnam. Cherry peers down at the saturated rice paper between her fingers. She held it under water too long. It is ruined now. Folding it up, she tucks it behind the water bowl. Grandpère wanted you to escape too? He'd already bought our seats, Grandaunt says. He bothered us until the night they left. But the point is, he was wrong. I am glad we stayed. How could I have left my 2 boys before they were properly buried? And now we have your brother. Not everyone was fated to leave. Maybe, Cherry says, distracted. It doesn't matter what she thinks, this relative she hardly knows. Instead, Cherry imagines these 2 seats on the boat, empty, wasted. They mold the salad rolls in silence, allowing the chorus of children's chatter and motorbike engines from the alley to fill the kitchen. So, what Cherry discovers in that scene is the idea of the 2 empty seats. The 2 empty seats actually indicates a major issue that the 2 families, the Truongs and the Bows, have with each other, because Cherry's grandpère was supposed to help bring Cherry's maternal family over, and the excuse was there were no more seats on the